Hello students, welcome to the third session of your first PUC NCERT chapter number 19, that is excretory product and their elimination. In last two sessions, we did come across different types of excretory products released by different types of organisms, along with which we have also discussed regarding the different parts of human excretory system involving pair of kidney, ureter as well as urinary bladder and the urethra. We came to know that the structural and functional unit in kidney is termed nephron. We have studied the different parts of nephron and how urine is formed inside the nephron. In today's class, we will be discussing regarding the regulation of kidney function. When it comes to regulation of kidney function, it is carried out by brain. So, in the brain, especially in the hypothalamus region of the brain, which acts as an endocrine gland. By releasing hormones. So, ಇಲ್ಲಿ endocrine glands in the or hypothalamus is a part of a brain which is acting as a endocrine gland. So, ಈ endocrine glands ಗಳು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತವೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ they release the secretions. ಈ secretions will be in the form of chemicals called hormones. Hormones are the secretions which are released by the endocrine glands. So, ಈ endocrine gland, especially the hypothalamus, they release a hormone which is termed anti-diuretic hormone. This particular hormone which is released from the hypothalamus will be present in the pituitary neurohypophysis. Pituitary neurohypophysis anta helidre, it is the posterior pituitary which stores this hormone which is released from the hypothalamus. So, brain na hypothalamus region in the they release a hormone called anti-diuretic hormone. This particular hormone is stored in the pituitary gland, especially in the posterior pituitary which is termed neurohypophysis. Next, ಈ hormone ಯಾವಾಗ release ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, when is this hormone released is, that is especially during the glomerular filtrate rate is below the normal level. So, whenever the glomerular filtrate rate is below the normal level, this anti-diuretic hormone will be released into the body. Whenever the anti-diuretic hormone, or it is also termed vasopressin, this hormone will be released when the glomerular filtrate rate is below the normal level. So, when these hormones are released, it activates the osmoreceptors so that there is increase in the blood volume and in turn increases the blood pressure by reducing the size of blood vessel. The thing is, what happens here is, brain na hypothalamus region ಇಂದ anti-diuretic factor ಅಥವಾ vasopressin ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ hormone release ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. They get stored in the posterior pituitary and these are released whenever there is a decrease in the glomerular filtrate rate. So, whenever the GFR is reduced, they activate the ಆಸ್ಮೋರಿಸೆಪ್ಟರ್ಸ್. ಈ ಆಸ್ಮೋರಿಸೆಪ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಏನು ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ, ಬ್ಲಡ್ ವಾಲ್ಯೂಮ್ ಅನ್ನು ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಬ್ಲಡ್ ವಾಲ್ಯೂಮ್ ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಆದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಬ್ಲಡ್ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಆಟೋಮ್ಯಾಟಿಕಲಿ ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಈ ಎರಡು ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಆಗಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ the size of the, if this is the size of the blood vessel will be narrowing itself. Once the blood vessel narrows itself, what happens is the blood pressure will be increased as well as the blood volume. This reduction in the size of the blood vessel automatically contribute towards the rise in the GIF. That is, it contributes in the increase of glomerular filtrate rate, which will be coming back to its normal level. That is how the brain manages the kidney functioning. Once again, to explain, the brain hypothalamic region releases vasopressin or anti-diuretic hormone stored in the posterior pituitary, which is released whenever there is a fall in the glomerular filtrate rate. Whenever the glomerular filtrate rate is reduced, this ADH or the vasopressin is acting on osmoreceptors, which automatically increases the blood volume and the blood pressure by reducing the size of blood vessel. Once this activity takes place, automatically there is a rise in the glomerular filtrate rate to its normal form. That is how the brain controls the kidney functioning. One more way of regulation will be glomerular apparatus. When it comes to juxtaglomerular apparatus, what happens here is this juxtaglomerular apparatus will be containing juxta cells which releases renin whenever there is a drop in the glomerular filtrate rate. Whenever there is glomerular filtrate rate getting below the normal level, the juxta cells of the kidney releases renin. This renin converts the angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1 and angiotensin 2. So it releases these two components whenever renin acts on angiotensinogen, that is the inactive form, which activates it into angiotensin 1 and then into angiotensin 2. This angiotensin 1 and 2, it increases the blood pressure and in turn increases the glomerular filtrate rate. So this juxtaglomerular apparatus of the kidney contain juxta cells which releases renin. This renin activates the angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1 and angiotensin 2, which increases the blood pressure by reducing the blood vessel size, which is also called vasoconstriction. This vasoconstriction reduces the size of blood vessel, increases the blood pressure and in turn increases the glomerular filtrate rate. So that is how there will be regulation of kidney functioning. Apart from this function, angiotensin 2, it also acts on adrenal cortex and activates a hormone called aldosterone. This aldosterone helps in reabsorption of water and Na+. So angiotensin 2 acts on adrenal cortex and activates the hormone aldosterone, which helps in reabsorption of water as well as sodium in the kidney. So in together, this mechanism is termed renin-angiotensin mechanism. So this is the second method by which the regulation of kidney takes place. When it comes to juxtaglomerular apparatus of the kidney, in which juxta cells are present, which activates or release the renin. This renin acts on angiotensinogen and converts it into angiotensin 1 and angiotensin 2, which helps in vasoconstriction and increases the blood pressure and in turn get the glomerular filtrate rate back into normal. This angiotensin 2 acts on adrenal cortex to release a hormone called aldosterone. This helps in reabsorption of water as well as sodium, and the whole mechanism is termed renin-angiotensin mechanism. That is about the second method of regulation. So third method is, it is due to release of ANF, that is atrial natriuretic factor. ANF is atrial natriuretic factor. Whenever there is an increased blood flow in the heart, the pressure will be applied on the atrial and the auricular walls ಮೇಲೆ pressure ಅನ್ನು apply ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ, the blood due to higher or increase in their flow. This increased flow or the pressure created by the blood on the auricular walls will lead them to release this ANF or atrial natriuretic factor. This helps in vasodilation, that is the size of vasoconstriction and the blood vessel size will be reduced. It increases the blood pressure. Whenever there is vasodilation, the blood vessel will increase its size and automatically there is a drop in the blood pressure. So vasodilation leads to reduction in the blood pressure as well as reduction in the glomerular filtrate rate. So this happens whenever there is high blood pressure. To reduce the glomerular filtrate rate, the atrial natriuretic factor released from the heart, that is produced in the heart due to increase in the blood flow and the pressure applied on the auricles of the heart. This ANF leads to vasodilation and reduces the blood pressure as well as the glomerular filtrate rate and gets back it to normal whenever there is a high increase in the blood pressure. Next one will be regarding the particular type of disease, that is diabetes insipidus. During diabetes insipidus, what happens is there will be excessive thirst as well as loss of water will be high, that is the excretion rate from a normal person to a diabetic patient will be much more. So in case of diabetes insipidus, it does not depend, or the excretion of urine does not depend on how much water or liquid has been taken inside. There are two types of diabetes insipidus based on neurological disorders. That will be central diabetic insipidus and one more will be nephrological. When it comes to central diabetic insipidus, what happens here is there will be improper release of anti-diuretic hormone or vasopressin by the brain, which leads to this central diabetic insipidus. Nephrological diabetic insipidus, here there will be caused because of dysfunctioning of the kidney. So there are two different types of diabetic insipidus, and in central diabetic insipidus, it is due to vasopressin or ADH not being properly released from the brain, and nephrological disorder is due to dysfunctioning or improper functioning of the kidney. Either there might be no proper reabsorption of water from the kidney and leads to this diabetic insipidus. Apart from this one, atrial natriuretic factor of the heart also plays a very major role, which helps in reducing the blood pressure due to vasodilation. This is how there will be regulation of kidney functioning using the hypothalamus hormone, that is vasopressin, or ADH, what we call anti-diuretic hormone, or the juxtaglomerular cells releasing the renin which is converting the angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1 and 2, where 2 also helps in reabsorption of sodium and water by releasing the adrenal cortex hormone aldosterone. The third method would be ANF released by the heart. So, in together first two methods help in vasoconstriction to increase the blood pressure and to get the GFR, that is glomerular filtrate rate, back to normal, where vasodilation leads to reduction in the blood pressure and getting back the GFR. So, that is about regulation of kidney. Next is micturation. When it comes to micturation, micturation means it is the urge of releasing the urine from the body. A urine is formed in the nephron of the kidney, which should be released from the urethra. For this purpose, what happens is, it is initially stored in the urinary bladder and are released to the urethra. From the urethra, they are released only when the signals are transferred from the central nervous system. But for the central nervous system to pass the signals, what should happen is, in the urinary bladder, for example, this is the urinary bladder, once the urine comes and stores in the bladder, they apply pressure on the walls of the urinary bladder, which leads to stretching of the urinary bladder walls. These stretching walls of the urinary bladder passes the signal to the central nervous system. This central nervous system now activates the or initiates the motor messages and send it to the excretory system for the smooth muscles of the urinary bladder to get contracted, and it also helps in relaxing the urinary sphincter, which leads to the release of the urine from the urethra, and this is what is termed micturation. Micturation means urine which is produced in the nephron will be stored in the urinary bladder before it is released from the urethra. The urge of releasing the urine will be sent by the central nervous system. So, central nervous system ge urinary bladder alli store ಆಗಿರುವಂತಹ urine ಏನು ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ, cells ಮೇಲೆ ಅಂದರೆ urinary bladder walls ಮೇಲೆ pressure ಅನ್ನು apply ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ, which leads to the stretching of the walls of urinary bladder. This stretched walls of urinary bladder send the signal to the central nervous system. So, from the central nervous system, a motor message is sent through the human excretory system for contraction of smooth muscles of the urinary bladder and relaxation of urinary sphincter. So, when this process, the contraction and relaxation process of urinary bladder and urinary sphincter takes place, then automatically the urine is released from the urethra. This is what is termed micturation. So, when it comes to this micturation, a urine released per day by an adult will be 1 to 1.5 liters, and the color of the urine will be pale yellow and it is acidic in nature with the pH of 6. Using this urine, it can also be used in identifying some of the metabolic disorders like presence of glucose in the urine, that is what we call glucosuria, or presence of keto bodies in the urine, which is called ketouria. These two metabolic disorders can be identified in a patient who is having diabetes. So, that is about micturation, where a urine is formed and the urge of removing it is produced due to the signals which are sent from the central nervous system with contraction of smooth muscles of urinary bladder and relaxation of urinary sphincter, leading it to release 1 to 1.5 liters of urine in an adult per day, which is yellow in color and acidic by nature. Using this urine, it can be also used to identify some of the metabolic disorders like glucose in the urine called glucouria or ketone bodies in the urine called ketouria. Next, we will have to study about role of other organs which are involved in removing the nitrogenous waste from the body. Role of other organs. First among that will be the lungs. Lungs almost remove about 18 liters of carbon dioxide in a day. So, these during respiration, especially during expiration process, release about 18 liters of carbon dioxide outside the body. Next method will be through the organ liver. So, liver, when it produces, or the hepatic cells which are present in the liver, release chemicals like bilirubin, biliverdin, degraded steroid hormones, some of the vitamins and drugs. All these are released through digestive wastes. From the body. Next one will be skin. Skin has two different forms. One will be sweat glands, another will be sebaceous glands. When it comes to sweat, sweat are released from sweat glands which contains water, salt, some amount of urea and traces of lactic acid. The basic function of sweat glands is to cool the body by releasing them from the sweat glands, along with which it also helps in excretion of water, NaCl, urea as well as lactic acid. Next one is sebaceous gland, which releases oil, or we call it sebum. This sebum also contains some of the waste substances like sterols and hydrocarbons, because of which one a oily layer will be released from the skin which protects our skin from entry of any of the pathogens also or dust substances. Apart from this one, next one is saliva, which also releases some of the traces of nitrogenous wastes. That is about different types of organs apart from the human excretory system involved in removing of waste from the body. It will be lungs, which releases almost 18 liters of carbon dioxide. Next is liver, which releases bilirubin, biliverdin, pigments, along with which degraded steroid hormones, vitamins and drugs, which will be released from the body in the form of digestive wastes. Skin releases or contains two different forms. One is sweat glands, another is sebaceous gland. Sweat glands release sweat. The basic function of releasing sweat is to cool the body temperature and also helps in removing water, NaCl, urea and traces of lactic acid. Sebaceous gland release oil, or it is also termed sebum, which contains sterols and hydrocarbons. Last one is saliva, which also removes some amount of or traces of nitrogenous wastes from the body. Last concept of this chapter will be disorders which can be seen in the excretory system. First one, first disorder will be uremia. Uremia means it is increase of urea in the blood. This can be treated by undergoing hemodialysis. Wherein the patient's blood, for example, if this is the dialysis chamber, the patient's blood from the artery is transferred into the dialysis chamber, which contains of a coiled poron. So, in the dialysis chamber for hemodialysis, the blood from the artery of the patient is drawn into the dialysis chamber. For hemodialysis process, the blood from the artery of the patient is transferred into the dialysis chamber, which contains a coiled poron cellophane tube. So, the components which are present in the chamber is the blood from the patient, and in the dialysis chamber it also contains a dialysis fluid. The dialysis fluid contains exact same components as that what is present within the cellophane tube except the urea. So, now when the blood is transferred into the dialysis chamber, what happens is urea moves from higher concentration to lower concentration, that is the urea will be now transferred from the cellophane tube into the dialysis fluid because it does not contain urea there. Once the urea is transferred into the dialysis fluid, the blood is now free from urea, which is transferred back again into the patient's body. So, this is how hemodialysis will be done. This is a repetitive process which the patient should undergo. Uremia means it is increased level of urea in the blood, which can be treated through the hemodialysis. In the process of hemodialysis, the blood from the artery is transferred into the hemodialysis or the dialysis chamber, where it contains a coiled poron cellophane tube within which the blood will be passing. This whole setup is placed in the chamber containing dialysis fluid. This dialysis fluid contains components exactly similar to that of blood plasma except the urea. So, now through the porons of the dialysis chamber or the cellophane tube, the urea from the patient's blood will be transferred into the dialysis fluid. Once the blood is free from urea, it can be transferred back into the patient's body. While the blood is transferred from the patient into the chamber, you have to keep one thing in mind, that normally if there is a cut in the body, the blood will start clotting. To avoid the clotting of blood when the blood is being transferred into the dialysis chamber, heparin should be added. Heparin should be added into the patient's blood so that there is no coagulation. There is no clotting of blood. And once the dialysis chamber clears the urea from the patient's blood, when it is passed into the body of the patient, then anti-heparin should be added. So, there is coagulation or clotting of blood. So, that is how uremia patient can be treated with hemodialysis. Heparin helps in avoiding coagulation, anti-heparin helps in coagulation of blood, so that when the blood is transferred into the patient's body, if in future if the patient is having any cut in his body, that can be coagulated or the blood will start to coagulate. So, that is about the first disorder, uremia. Renal failure is mainly caused due to the rejection of the kidney, especially during kidney transplantation. An unknown donor, if provides the kidney to the patient, what happens is the patient's body will start to reject the kidney because of the immune cells present in the patient's body, which leads to renal failure, where the kidney will not be functioning. Next one is renal calculi. When it comes to renal calculi, here it is due to storage of some salts like oxalates which forms crystallized stones, which we commonly call kidney stone. That is due to accumulation of the salts which form a crystallized structure, especially the oxalates, which interrupts in the normal functioning of the kidney, which is called renal calculi. Last disease will be glomerulonephritis. This is caused due to inflammation in the kidney, especially the glomerulus. When it comes to glomerulus, glomerulus is a part of nephron which helps in filtration of blood and helps in removal of the urine. When it comes to this glomerulonephritis, in the glomerulus, if there is inflammation ಅಥವಾ ಊದು ಬರುವಂತದ್ದು ಕಂಡ್ರೆ, it leads to improper filtration of the blood to produce the urine. That is what is termed glomerulonephritis. These are the 4 different disorders coming under human excretory system. The first disorder is uremia, when there is increase in the urea in the blood, which can be treated to hemodialysis using the dialysis chamber containing the poron cellophane tube and the dialysis fluid without any urea. So there is diffusion process where the urea from higher concentration moves to lower concentration, and then the urea free blood can be transferred into the patient's body. During this process, to avoid the coagulation when the blood is being transferred, heparin will be added, and when the blood from the dialysis chamber is transferred into the patient's body, anti-heparin will be added so that coagulation takes place. Next is renal failure. Renal failure is easily observed during kidney transplantation, where the patient's body, due to his immune cells, will be rejecting the donor's kidney. Renal calculi is accumulation of excess of salts which will be in the form of crystallized form, which we commonly call oxalates, which leads to formation of stones, commonly called kidney stones, interrupting the kidney functions. Last one is glomerulonephritis. It is caused due to inflammation in the glomerulus, which doesn't allow the ultrafiltration properly to takes place. That is about different types of disorders, and that's all in this particular chapter. In this chapter, we have discussed regarding the human excretory system, different types of excretory products, nephron which helps in urine formation, regulation of kidney functioning, micturation, role of other organs which are involved in elimination of waste from the body, and finally the disorders. I hope you understood the class. Thank you.